The warning siren screamed through the Earth Space Command Center at 3 in the morning. Commander Jiho sprinted down the metal corridor, his boots pounding against the floor. His heart raced as he pulled on his uniform jacket. Something massive was happening, and it couldn't wait for sunrise. The operations room blazed with light and activity. Every screen displayed the same terrifying image. An enormous ship drifted through space near Mars, trailing clouds of frozen air and broken metal. The vessel looked ancient and wounded, held together by patches and prayers. Jiho had never seen anything like it in all his years of service. Lieutenant Yunji turned from her console, her face pale with shock. "Sir, they're broadcasting distress signals in 20 different languages. They're begging for help." Jiho stepped closer to the main screen, studying the dying ship. It stretched over 3 kilometers long, but most of it sat dark and cold. Only a few sections still glowed with life. "Can we understand what they're saying?" Yunji touched her earpiece, listening carefully. "The Coalition translator is working on it now." She paused, and her eyes went wide. "Sir, they call themselves the Velnar. They say they're refugees, the last survivors of their entire race." The main view screen flickered. A face appeared that made several operators gasp. It was reptilian, covered in golden scales that caught the light. Large eyes stared out at them, filled with exhaustion and desperate hope. When the creature spoke, the computer translated its words into human language. "This is Elder Callus of the Velnar people. Our generation ship is dying. We carry 50,000 souls, including 15,000 children. We have traveled through the emptiness of space for 3 years. Every world has turned us away. We have nowhere left to go. Please, we are begging you. Show us mercy." Something twisted hard in Jiho's chest. 3 years in that broken ship. Children starving in the darkness. "Open a communication channel right now," he ordered. Captain Minho stepped forward quickly, concern written across his features. "Commander, we need to contact the Coalition first. We can't make this kind of decision without permission." Jiho's jaw tightened. "Those people are dying while we speak. Get me President Minji immediately, and launch every rescue ship we have. We'll handle the Coalition after we save lives." Within 1 hour, Earth's entire rescue fleet surrounded the Velnar vessel. Medical teams in protective suits crossed through airlocks and into the refugee ship. What they found shocked even the most experienced emergency workers. The Velnar were starving, their bodies thin and weak. Disease spread through the crowded corridors. Children lay listless in their parents' arms. But they were still alive. And when they saw humans coming to help, many began to weep. Dr. Hyun led the primary medical response. She had studied alien biology ever since Earth joined the Galactic Coalition 5 years earlier. Walking through the Velnar ship, she saw suffering beyond anything she had imagined. When she finally met Elder Callus in person, the old reptilian reached out and grasped her hands with his scaled fingers. "You came," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You actually came for us. The galaxy abandoned us completely, but you came." Hyun squeezed his hands gently. "Tell me what happened. Why are you here? What drove you from your home?" Darkness filled Callus's golden eyes. "We refused to die for someone else's profit. Our world was beautiful, filled with rare minerals that the Draxith Empire desired. They arrived with contracts and sweet promises. But when we read the actual terms, we understood the terrible truth. They would strip our planet of everything valuable, poison our water sources, destroy our ecosystems, and leave us with barren rock. We said no." His voice grew heavy with pain. "The Coalition Council branded us as resource hoarders. They claimed we were blocking galactic progress and economic growth. The great powers gave us an impossible choice: surrender our world and watch it die, or leave known space forever and never return. We chose exile. We believed that somewhere in this vast galaxy, someone would show us basic kindness. We were wrong about that. For 3 long years, every single system we approached turned us away in fear, until we found you." Hyun felt tears sting her eyes. "You're safe now, Elder Callus. I promise you that." But even as those words left her mouth, the Coalition was already moving against them. Ambassador Vrel landed on Earth within 24 hours. The insectoid diplomat stood before an emergency session of Earth's government. His compound eyes reflected no warmth, no compassion, only cold calculation. "The Velnar are convicted criminals under galactic law," Vrel announced. His voice came through a translator with a harsh mechanical quality. "They defied lawful orders from a Coalition founding member. Earth holds only probationary membership in our alliance. You lack the authority to grant these criminals asylum. President Minji sat calmly at the head of the long council table. She was young for a planetary leader, only 43 years old, but decades of diplomatic service had taught her about power and its corruptions. She understood how the game was played. "Tell me something, Ambassador," she said quietly. "What exactly was the Velnar's crime? What terrible thing did they do that deserves 3 years of suffering?" Vrel's mandibles clicked with irritation. They refused to honor their obligations to the greater galactic economy. Resources must be shared for the common good. Shared, Minji repeated slowly. Or stolen? Were the Velnar offered fair compensation? Would they have been able to survive on their homeworld after your mining operations finished? That question is not relevant to this discussion, Vrel snapped. The law is absolutely clear. You will surrender the Velnar refugees within 7 days, or Earth will be expelled from the Coalition. Every trade agreement you hold will be terminated immediately. Your colonies will face military blockades. Your entire species will be isolated once again. The council chamber erupted into shouting. Ministers argued about the economy, about Earth's fragile position, about the terrible cost of defying the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. Humanity had worked desperately hard to join the Coalition, to prove they deserved a place among the stars. Minji let them argue for nearly an hour. Then she raised one hand and silence gradually fell. "We will vote on this matter," she said firmly. "But before we do, I want to share something important with all of you." She touched a control panel. A holographic image appeared above the center of the table. It showed a beach with golden sand and blue waves. Hundreds of Velnar children played in Earth's ocean for the first time in their lives. Their scales gleamed beautifully in the afternoon sunlight. Human children ran alongside them, building sand castles together, laughing at the wonderful strangeness of new friendship. "My grandfather told me stories when I was young," Minji said softly. "Stories about refugees who came to our shores when the world had turned against them. Some were welcomed with open arms. Many others were turned away in fear and prejudice. Decades later, we looked back with deep shame at the ones we had abandoned. We made solemn promises to ourselves and to history. We said never again. We promised we would never close our doors to people who desperately needed safety and hope." She looked around the table slowly, meeting each minister's eyes. "We humans are not perfect. Our history is stained with terrible crimes and countless mistakes. But we have also learned from our worst failures. This moment gives us the chance to prove that we meant those promises. That never again actually means something real." The vote was close and tense, but it passed. Earth would grant the Velnar complete asylum. Ambassador Vrel stood to leave. Rage radiated from his rigid posture. "You have made a grave and foolish mistake. The Coalition will make you deeply regret this choice." After the insectoid diplomat left, Defense Minister Sun Wu approached Minji with worry written across his face. "Madam President, we may have just signed Earth's death warrant. The Coalition commands thousands of powerful warships. We have only 40 vessels." Minji turned back to the hologram. It still showed the beach scene. One small Velnar child had stumbled and fallen. A human girl was helping him stand up, brushing sand from his golden scales with gentle care. Both children were smiling with pure joy. "Perhaps you're right," Minji said quietly. "But at least we'll be able to look at ourselves honestly in the mirror. Send alerts to all our colonies. Begin preparations for economic sanctions. And send this message to the Velnar people. Welcome to Earth, welcome home." 3 days later, the first Coalition sanctions struck like hammer blows. Trade routes closed overnight. Technology licenses were revoked without warning. Earth's economy shuddered and stumbled under the sudden impact. But in the red deserts of southeastern Australia, Velnar engineers worked side by side with human construction crews. Together, they were building the first hybrid settlement. Elder Callus planted a precious seed from his destroyed homeworld in Earth's rich soil. His old hands shook with overwhelming emotion. The galaxy had abandoned his people completely, but Earth had opened its arms wide. And sometimes, just sometimes, that made all the difference in the universe. 6 months had crawled past since the Velnar arrived, and Earth was learning the harsh reality of sheltering the unwanted. The Coalition's sanctions cut deep into every aspect of daily life. Fuel prices tripled overnight. Medical supplies from off-world stations became rare and precious. The Mars colony sent increasingly desperate messages about severe food shortages and failing life support systems, but something Unexpected was happening in the Velnar, settlements scattered across Earth. Taman stood sweating, in the Australian desert heat, staring hard at the blueprint displayed on his tablet screen. He was a professional architect with years of training in sustainable design, but nothing in his formal education had prepared him for this impossible challenge. How do you build a city for beings who need constant, intense heat, and beings who prefer moderate, comfortable temperatures? You're thinking too hard again, as usual, a raspy voice said behind him with clear amusement. He turned to see Thessa approaching across the red sand. She was a Velnar engineer, who had somehow become his unlikely work partner over the past months. Her scales gleamed deep bronze in the harsh sunlight, and she had a distinctive habit of tilting her head sideways when something amused her. Your species always makes simple things unnecessarily complicated. We prefer to call it being thorough, Taman protested, but he couldn't help smiling. Over months of constant collaboration, he and Thessa had developed an easy friendship built on mutual respect and endless friendly debate. Look here, Thessa said, pointing one clawed finger at his design. You're attempting to heat this entire massive structure uniformly. That's incredibly wasteful of energy. Instead, create distinct thermal zones. Hot spaces for my people, cooler, comfortable spaces for your people, and neutral shared spaces that meet somewhere in the middle. Taman studied the blueprint with completely fresh eyes. She was absolutely right. Thermal zones with gradient barriers. We could use your crystal technology for the transitional walls. Finally, the human understands basic engineering, Thessa said in her rasping laugh. Come with me. I'll show you exactly how we designed buildings on our homeworld. Before the Draxith mining corporations destroyed everything beautiful, they worked together through the blazing hot afternoon. Slowly, steadily, a revolutionary new design emerged on their screens. It belonged to neither human nor Velnar traditions, but to something entirely new. Buildings that spiraled gracefully upward, using Earth's natural wind patterns combined with Velnar heat capture technology to create perfectly comfortable environments for both species. Halfway across the continent, other kinds of bridges were being carefully built. In a bright elementary school classroom in Sydney, a young teacher named Ms. Kyung faced her most challenging student yet. Rikos was a Velnar child, only 8 years old by human developmental standards, and he sat hunched alone at the very back of the classroom. The other children were frightened of him. His scales, his larger size, his strange golden eyes, everything about him seemed utterly alien and scary. Rikos, Ms. Kyung said with gentle patience, would you like to share your drawing with the class? The young Velnar child hunched even lower. His scales darkened to a muddy brown color that signaled deep distress. He shook his head silently. Before Ms. Kyung could respond with encouragement, a small girl named Sujin suddenly stood up. She was tiny for her age, barely reaching most children's shoulders, but her spirit blazed fierce and bright. I want to see his drawing, she announced boldly. She walked straight to Rikos' desk without hesitation and looked down at his artwork. It showed 2 planets floating in space. One gleamed green and beautiful and alive. The other sat barren and red and dead. Between these 2 worlds floated a small figure, completely alone in the terrible darkness. That's you, isn't it? Sujin said very quietly. Floating between where you came from and where you are now. Rikos looked up at her with his large golden eyes opened wide in surprise. Very slowly, he nodded his scaled head. I understand exactly how that feels, Sujin said seriously. My family came from another country when I was really little. I couldn't speak the language properly. Everything seemed scary and different and wrong. But it got so much better eventually. Do you want to have lunch with me today? My mom packed way too many sandwiches. From that single moment forward, Rikos and Sujin became completely inseparable. Where one went, the other reliably followed. And slowly, gradually, the other children stopped being afraid. They began asking curious questions. They started inviting Rikos to play games together, but not every human on Earth was adjusting well to these dramatic changes. Finance Minister Donga stood before President Minji holding a tablet, absolutely filled with terrible statistics. Madam President, we're running out of time rapidly. The coalition blockade has slashed our interplanetary shipping by 60%. Food production numbers are dropping. Energy costs are absolutely crippling our major cities. If we don't find workable solutions very soon, we're looking at widespread shortages and possible riots. Minji rubbed her exhausted eyes. She hadn't managed proper sleep in several weeks. What about the Velnar refugees? Have they contributed anything useful to our situation? Donga's stern expression softened noticeably. Actually, yes, they have. Their crystal solar technology has improved our panel efficiency by 30% already, and their deep understanding of geothermal energy extraction is literally decades ahead of our best research. But it's still not nearly enough to offset everything we've lost. A sharp knock interrupted their grim discussion. Elder Callus entered the office, accompanied by Thessa and two other serious-looking Velnar scientists. They all appeared genuinely excited about something. President Minji, Callus said with barely contained enthusiasm, "We may have discovered a real solution to your growing energy crisis. My people have been carefully studying your planet's unique geology. There are absolutely massive geothermal reserves beneath the Pacific Ocean floor that your civilization hasn't tapped yet. With our advanced drilling technology combined with your manufacturing capabilities, we could create power generation stations that would supply half your entire planet's energy needs." Minji leaned forward intently. "How long would this take to implement?" 6 months to construct and test the first functional station. Perhaps 1 full year for a complete planetary network," Thessa answered confidently. "But we would need full access to your deep-sea facilities and close cooperation with your best engineers." "You'll have everything you need," Minji said immediately. "Donga, make this your absolute top priority." As the Velnar delegation left her office, Donga shook his head in genuine wonder. "They're actively trying to save us. After everything the galaxy did to them, after all their suffering, they're trying to save the one species that showed them basic kindness." "That's what fundamentally good people do," Minji said quietly. "They remember kindness and return it multiplied." But the coalition wasn't remotely finished with Earth yet. Captain Jiwan commanded a small but tough cargo vessel called the Persistence. Before the brutal sanctions began, she had routinely run medical supplies between Earth and the struggling Mars colony. Now, with the coalition military blockade firmly in place, those vital supply runs had become completely impossible. "Officially, tell me again why this is possibly a good idea," her nervous co-pilot muttered as they approached the heavily patrolled blockade zone, "because those people on Mars desperately need antibiotics to survive. And I'm absolutely not letting arrogant bureaucrats from halfway across the galaxy tell me I can't help my own species," Jiwan replied. Her hands remained perfectly steady on the ship's controls. She had studied the coalition patrol patterns obsessively for many weeks. There existed a gap, just one small precious window of time when 2 different patrol routes crossed and briefly left a narrow section of space completely unwatched. It lasted exactly 4 minutes. "Beginning our supply run now," she announced calmly. "Kill all non-essential systems immediately. Make us as small and invisible as possible." The Persistence drifted silently through the narrow gap like a ghost ship. Jiwan held her breath as coalition sensor arrays swept dangerously past them. One single alarm, one alert signal, and they would be captured or destroyed without mercy. 3 minutes passed. 4 agonizing minutes. 5. "We're through the blockade," her co-pilot gasped with relief. Jiwan allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. One successful run down, dozens more to go. There are a lot of people who desperately need our help. Over the following months, Captain Jiwan became an underground legend. Other independent traders joined her dangerous cause, forming a loose network they called the Free Runners. They smuggled vital supplies, precious medicine, and hope itself through the blockade. The coalition tried desperately to stop them, but humans proved small, clever, and incredibly stubborn. Meanwhile, in a high-security research facility in South Korea, Engineer Soman made a discovery that would change the entire galaxy forever. She had been carefully studying captured coalition technology, attempting to understand how their universal translators actually worked. But during her research, she found something else entirely. "Dr. Hyun, you absolutely need to see this immediately," Sumin said with urgent intensity. "Coalition translation techno." The emergency alarm screamed through the command center again, and Commander Jiho felt that familiar combination of dread and determination settle over him. Another unknown ship had suddenly appeared at the edge of their solar system. Another desperate group of refugees seeking sanctuary from a hostile galaxy. But this vessel looked completely different from the Velnar's massive generation ship. It was smaller, more streamlined in design, and filled entirely with water. The beings inside were aquatic creatures with smooth blue skin, and large black eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. They called themselves the Krell. "Why were you exiled from Coalition space?" President Minji asked their leader during the emergency government session. The Krell ambassador spoke through a special water-filled communication tank. Her name translated roughly as wave song in human language. "We refuse to send our precious children to die in the Coalition's endless wars. The Council enforces mandatory military service requirements for all member species. We are fundamentally peaceful people. We believe strongly in defending our homes, but we do not believe in conquest or imperial expansion. When we refuse to contribute young soldiers for the brutal invasion of the Terminus systems, they branded us as cowards and traitors to galactic civilization." Minji studied the exhausted Krell floating in their tank. 30,000 of them were crammed into a ship designed for half that population. "How long have you been searching desperately for asylum?" 2 full years. Every single world turned us away in fear. They fear the Coalition's power far more than they value innocent life. Wavesong paused, her movement slowing. "We heard persistent rumors about Earth, about the strange mammals who sheltered the Velnar despite terrible consequences. We thought perhaps the rumors were lies, too good to be true. But we had to try one last time." Minji looked around at her council. Everyone understood exactly what this meant. More brutal sanctions, more economic pressure, more suffering for Earth's own people. Defense Minister Sunwoo spoke first, his voice heavy with worry. "If we keep accepting more refugees, the Coalition will eventually take direct military action. We're absolutely not ready for that kind of fight. We'll never be truly ready," Minji replied quietly. "But we can be right. We can stand for something that matters. Vote." Once again, the Council chose compassion over safety. The Krell were officially welcomed to Earth. Within 1 month, 3 more exile ships arrived in rapid succession. The Moths came next, delicate beings who communicated through telepathy and beautiful bioluminescent patterns on their wings. They had been exiled for speaking uncomfortable truth to power, for using their telepathic abilities to expose widespread corruption in the Coalition Council. The guilty counselors had declared them dangerous and ordered their complete removal from civilized space. Then came the Stonewalkers, massive silicon-based beings who moved slowly, but thought deeply. Their crime was religion. They worshipped the ancient stones of their volcanic homeworld and refused to let Coalition mining corporations destroy their sacred mountains. For their faith, they were cast out into exile. Finally, the singers arrived. Small beings whose entire culture revolved around music and sound. They had been exiled for sharing their songs freely with anyone who wished to hear them, refusing to allow a Coalition corporation to copyright and monetize their cultural heritage. Each time, Ambassador Vrel appeared with the same threats and demands. Each time, Earth firmly refused to turn away those who desperately needed help. And each time, the Coalition's economic sanctions grew harsher and more punishing. Resources on Earth strained toward the breaking point. The Mars and Europa colonies were cut off completely, surviving only because of Captain Jiwan and her growing fleet of brave blockade runners. Food rationing became common in all major cities. Power outages rolled through neighborhoods on carefully scheduled rotations. Finance Minister Dongha presented increasingly desperate reports to the government. "Madam President, we absolutely cannot sustain this. We have over 150,000 refugees now, all needing food, shelter, and medical care. Our own people are suffering badly. There are large protests in the streets demanding that we reverse our decision and expel the refugees. But something completely unexpected was happening. As each new group of refugees arrived, they brought precious gifts. The Krell shared their advanced water purification technology, systems so efficient they could convert seawater into fresh water, at a fraction of the energy cost of human desalination. Within weeks, water shortages became a thing of the past. The Moths understood agriculture in ways humans had never imagined possible. Their natural telepathic connection to plants allowed them to optimize growing conditions perfectly. Crop yields tripled in fields where the Moths worked alongside human farmers. The Stonewalkers brought geothermal technology that made the Velnar's contributions look primitive. They could drill deeper, extract more energy, and do it all with minimal environmental impact. Earth's energy crisis began to ease. The singers discovered that their music had an unusual effect on human psychology. Their songs reduced stress, improved focus, and helped people work together more efficiently. Factories where singers performed saw productivity increase by 40%. Working together, humans and refugees didn't just survive the crisis, they began to thrive. In the hybrid city of New Haven in Australia, Taman walked through streets filled with beings from 6 different worlds. Velnar children played with human kids in parks designed by Stonewalker architects. Krell swam through decorative water channels that doubled as transportation networks. Moths fluttered through community gardens that fed the entire settlement. "It's genuinely beautiful," Thessa said, walking beside him. "I never imagined anything like this was possible." "Neither did we," Taman admitted honestly. "But maybe that's the important point. None of us could have built this alone." Dr. Hyun worked in a medical research facility where human doctors collaborated with Krell physicians and moth healers. They were developing revolutionary treatments that combined the best knowledge from all their species. Diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were falling before this combined assault. One day, a young human patient named Jin Seo came in with a rare genetic disorder. Human medicine could only slow its terrible progress. But the Krell doctor, working closely with a moth healer and Hyun, developed a completely new treatment using techniques from all 3 species. When Jin Seo walked out of the hospital fully healed, his parents wept with overwhelming joy. The story spread rapidly across Earth's networks, and many of the protesters who had demanded the refugees leave grew quiet. Meanwhile, engineer Soman completed her universal translator. She called it the Unity Network, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It didn't filter. It didn't control. It simply translated perfectly and instantly, allowing any species to communicate with any other. She demonstrated it to President Minji by having a conversation with Elder Callus. Wavesong the Krell and a moth named Shimmer all at once. Their words flowed naturally, no delay, no misunderstanding. "This is absolutely incredible," Minji breathed with wonder. "Soman, do you fully understand what you've created? This could change the entire galaxy." "That's exactly the idea," Soman said with a slight smile. "The Coalition controls all communication. They decide who talks to whom and what gets said. But if we release this freely to everyone, people could organize, coordinate. The Coalition's control would crumble." Minji thought for a long moment. "Do it. Broadcast the Unity Network to every system we can reach. Let's give the galaxy its voice back." That night, Earth's communication satellites began transmitting the Unity Network to every corner of known space. Anyone with a receiver could download it freely. No restrictions. No control. The response was immediate and explosive. Minor species across the Coalition began using the Unity Network to talk to each other directly for the first time. They shared grievances, compared experiences, and realized they all suffered under the same oppressive system. What had been scattered complaints became a unified movement. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session. The Draxith representative slammed his fist on the table. "Earth must be stopped immediately. They are actively fomenting rebellion across our entire alliance. Earth has given away technology that undermines our authority." An insectoid counselor agreed angrily. "This cannot stand." Ambassador Vrel delivered the final ultimatum personally. He appeared before the entire Earth government, his compound eyes glittering with cold fury. "Earth has exactly 30 days to surrender all refugee populations and cease broadcasting the Unity Network. If you refuse, the Coalition will take military action. We will blockade your entire system. We will seize your colonies. And if necessary, we will occupy Earth itself. You cannot possibly win this fight. Surrender now, or face complete destruction." After Vrel left, the government chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. War was coming. Real war. Against an alliance that controlled thousands of worlds and had fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands of ships. Earth had maybe 200 combat-capable vessels, including the retrofitted civilian ships that volunteers had armed. Defense Minister Sunwoo stood slowly. "We need to evacuate the refugees. Get them." The Coalition Armada assembled at the edge of the solar system like a storm made of metal and fire. 300 warships from a dozen different species, each one bristling with weapons powerful enough to crack planets. Admiral Krenth commanded from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. He broadcast his message on all frequencies, making absolutely sure Earth heard every word. "People of Earth, you have 1 hour to surrender. Release all refugee populations to our custody immediately. Shut down your Unity network permanently. Submit to coalition authority. If you comply, we will be merciful. If you resist, we will treat you as enemy combatants. You have 1 hour. On Earth in the command center, President Minji stood with her council and military leaders. Through the windows, she could see the hybrid city below, where humans and 6 alien species lived and worked together. Children played in the parks. Markets bustled with activity. People from different worlds had become neighbors, friends, family. Tell him no, she said quietly. Commander Jiho, now promoted to admiral after months of desperate preparation, looked at her. Madam President, are you absolutely certain? Once we refuse, there's no going back. I'm certain, Minji replied firmly. She touched the control that would broadcast her response to the coalition fleet and to every corner of the galaxy. Admiral Krenth, Earth hears your demands. Our answer is no. We will not surrender people who sought our protection. We will not silence voices that deserve to be heard. We will not kneel to an authority that values power over justice. If you want Earth, you'll have to take it by force, and we will make you regret every meter of space you cross. The hour ticked down in tense silence. All across Earth, people prepared for war. In the cities, civilians moved to underground shelters. In orbit, Earth's small defense fleet took up positions alongside vessels crewed by refugee volunteers. The Velnar had retrofitted their generation ship, turning it into a massive mobile fortress. Krell submarines converted for space combat darted between asteroids. Stonewalkers had spent weeks building defensive platforms from captured space debris, creating a crude but effective barrier network. The Moths linked every defender in a telepathic network, allowing instant communication without electronic signals that could be jammed. Every human pilot, every Velnar gunner, every Krell navigator was connected in a web of shared consciousness. They fought not as individuals but as a single organism. Admiral Jiho stood on the bridge of the EDF Unity, Earth's flagship. It was a retrofitted colony ship, never meant for combat, but they'd done their best. Beside him stood Thessa, who had helped design the ship's shield systems, and Captain Jiwan, who commanded the fighter wing. All ships report ready, Jiwan said, her voice steady despite the fear everyone felt. Jiho looked at the tactical display. 300 coalition ships versus Earth's 200 vessels, most of which were civilian craft with weapons bolted on. The numbers didn't just favor the enemy. They promised complete annihilation. Well, he said softly, if we're going to die, let's die doing the right thing. All ships, battle stations. The coalition fleet advanced. The first engagement happened near Mars. 20 coalition destroyers moved to secure the colony, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they ran into Captain Jiwan and her Freerunners backed by Krell attack craft. The Freerunners had spent months learning to fight dirty. They used asteroids for cover, set traps, and struck from unexpected angles. The Krell ships moved through space like they moved through water, flowing around enemy fire and attacking from blind spots. In the telepathic network, G1 felt every pilot's thoughts, their fears and hopes. A moth named Shimmer coordinated their movements, creating patterns that confused enemy targeting systems. They fought like a school of fish, each individual moving in perfect harmony with the whole. 3 coalition destroyers exploded in the first 10 minutes. The others retreated, shocked and disorganized, but that was just the opening skirmish. The main fleet continued toward Earth, unstoppable as a tidal wave. Admiral Krenth studied the reports with growing irritation. How were these primitives fighting so well? Their ships were inferior. Their weapons were outdated. By all logical analysis, they should have been crushed immediately. They're using some kind of coordinated tactical network, his intelligence officer reported. Our jamming systems can't block it. It's biological, not electronic. Then kill them faster than they can coordinate, Krenth ordered. All ships full assault. Overwhelm their defenses. The coalition fleet broke into attack formations and charged. The battle for Earth began in earnest. Stone Walker fortresses opened fire with weapons that hurled chunks of metal at incredible speeds. The crude weapons lacked the sophistication of coalition technology. But when a 50-ton boulder hit a ship at a significant fraction of light speed, sophistication didn't matter. Velnar shield technology proved remarkably effective at deflecting energy weapons. Their crystalline barriers bent laser fire around protected ships, creating safe corridors through the firestorm. Human ships fought with desperate creativity. The EDF Unity, never designed for combat, used its cargo bays to launch swarms of improvised missiles. Other ships released clouds of reflective chaff that scattered targeting sensors. One civilian freighter, badly damaged and losing atmosphere, deliberately rammed a coalition cruiser, its captain shouting defiance until the very end. In the telepathic network, every death was felt by everyone. Every loss hurt them all, but instead of breaking their spirit, it strengthened their resolve. Shimmer the Moth broadcast feelings of determination and unity across the network. When pilots felt fear, they also felt the courage of their companions. When ships were destroyed, the survivors felt the sacrifice and fought harder to honor it. The coalition had better weapons, better ships, better training. But they fought as individuals, each captain concerned with their own survival and glory. Earth's defenders fought as one living organism, each part supporting the whole. Elder Callus commanded the Velnar fortress ship, his old hands steady on the controls. When a coalition battleship targeted a transport full of evacuating children, he moved his massive vessel directly into the line of fire. The Velnar shields held just long enough for the transport to escape. "This is for my world," Callus whispered as his ship took devastating damage. "For every world that stood silent while we suffered." The fortress ship exploded, taking the coalition battleship with it. All across the telepathic network, defenders felt Callus's death and his final emotion. Pride. Pride in Earth. Pride in what they had built together. The battle raged for hours. Earth's defenders fell back slowly, making the coalition pay for every kilometer with blood and burning metal. But they were losing. Everyone knew it. On the EDF Unity's bridge, Jiho watched their forces dwindle. They'd started with 200 ships. Now they had less than 150. The coalition had lost 40 vessels, a remarkable achievement, but it wasn't enough. "Admiral," Thessa said urgently, "I'm detecting something. Multiple slipspace signatures. More coalition reinforcements." Jiho's heart sank. They couldn't handle the current fleet. Reinforcements would mean the end. But when the new ships emerged from slipspace, they weren't flying coalition colors. 20 warships appeared, sleek and deadly, bearing the mark of the Frontier Confederacy, a small alliance of independent systems far from coalition control. Their leader's face appeared on Jiho's screen, a reptilian being with kind eyes. "Earth Defense Forces, this is Commander Vex of the Frontier Confederacy. We heard your broadcast. We saw you stand up to the coalition when no one else would. We've been waiting for someone to have the courage to say no. We're here to help." Before Jiho could respond, more ships arrived. 50 vessels from the Free Traders Alliance. Then 100 more from a coalition of minor species who had used Earth's Unity network to organize their resistance. Within minutes, Earth's defenders were no longer outnumbered. The galaxy's oppressed peoples had found their voice, and they had come to help the world that had given them hope. Admiral Krenth stared at his tactical display in disbelief. How had this happened? Where had all these ships come from? His communications officer provided the answer. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across coalition space. There are protests on 100 worlds. Minor species are demanding representation and reform. Several systems are threatening to secede. The Unity network has allowed them to organize." Krenth realized with cold certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. Destroying Earth wouldn't restore order. It would make Earth into a martyr and ignite a revolution that would tear the coalition apart. "All ships stand down," he ordered. "Ceasefire." The silence that followed was deafening. President Minji's voice came across all channels. "Admiral Krenth, Earth is willing to negotiate. Not surrender. Negotiate. As equals." Krenth looked at the fleet surrounding his forces, and at the planet below where billions of beings had found refuge and hope. He had come to punish Earth for defying the coalition. Instead, he had proven exactly why Earth's defiance was necessary. "Very well," he said quietly. "Let us talk." The negotiations took place on neutral ground, aboard a Frontier Confederacy station at the edge of the solar system. President Minji walked into the conference room with Admiral Jiho and representatives from each of the refugee species. Across the table sat Admiral Krenth and a delegation of coalition counselors. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. A Draxith counselor spoke first, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have caused chaos across coalition space. Species are rebelling. Trade routes are disrupted. "This is your doing, Earth." "No," Minji replied calmly. "This is your doing. You created a system where the powerful exploited the weak, where species were exiled for refusing to be victims, where communication itself was controlled and filtered. We just gave people the tools to speak the truth. The truth according to criminals and malcontents," another counselor snapped. Thera, Elder Callus's daughter who had taken her father's place after his death in battle, rose to her feet. Her scales were dark with anger. "My people refused to let you destroy our world for profit. That was our crime. What was the crime of the Krell? What was the crime of the moths? Speaking truth? Believing in peace? Practicing their religion?" She looked around the table at each coalition representative. "You exiled us because we reminded you that power without justice is just tyranny. Earth showed us that there's another way." For hours they argued. The coalition demanded that Earth surrender the Unity Network and return all refugees. Earth refused. The newly arrived allies from the Frontier Confederacy and Free Traders Alliance backed Earth's position. Finally, Admiral Krenth spoke. He was a military man, not a politician, and he had seen enough death in the recent battle to last a lifetime. "Enough," he said tiredly. "The coalition has a choice. We can continue this war and watch our alliance tear itself apart as more species rebel. Or we can adapt, reform, create a system that doesn't require exile and oppression to function. You would have us surrender to terrorists?" A counselor demanded. "I would have us survive," Krenth replied. "I fought Earth today. I watched civilians in cargo ships ram my warships rather than surrender the refugees they were protecting. I saw beings from 6 different species coordinate perfectly in battle because they believed in something worth dying for. We can't defeat that kind of conviction. Not with weapons." The negotiations continued for 3 days. In the end, a framework emerged. The coalition would undergo massive reforms. Minor species would gain voting rights proportional to their populations. The exile system would be abolished. The Unity Network would be recognized as a galactic public good, free for all to use, and Earth would become the center of a new organization called the Haven Accord, dedicated to providing sanctuary and representation for species that the coalition had marginalized. It wasn't perfect. Many in the coalition resented the changes, but it was a start. 5 years later, the galaxy looked very different. Sujin stood in the graduation ceremony at the Earth Diplomatic Academy, wearing the formal uniform of the Haven Accord's Ambassador Corps. Beside her stood Rikos, now a young adult Velnar dressed in the same uniform. They had both chosen careers in diplomacy, inspired by the world they'd grown up in. A world where different species worked together, where old enemies became friends, where the impossible became reality. "Remember when we first met?" Sujin asked, smiling at her oldest friend. "You were so scared of everything." Rikos's scales rippled with amusement. "You gave me half your sandwich and told me everything would be okay. I thought you were crazy. Humans and Velnar weren't supposed to be friends. Good thing neither of us listened to what we were supposed to do." They received their first assignment together. Representatives to a newly discovered species on the frontier. Their job was to make sure these newcomers didn't face the same isolation and exploitation that had almost destroyed the Velnar. In the hybrid city of New Haven, Taman and Thessa stood before the completed monument to Elder Callus and all those who had died defending Earth. It was a beautiful structure, combining human and Velnar design principles with contributions from all the refugee species. "He would have loved this," Thessa said softly, touching the crystalline surface. "He made it possible," Taman replied. "All of them did." The city around them buzzed with life. Markets where humans traded with stonewalkers. Schools where moth children learned alongside human kids. Krell swimming through the water channels, chatting with pedestrians above. It wasn't perfect. There were still misunderstandings, still conflicts. But they worked through them together. Dr. Hyun worked in the Galactic Medical Research Center that had been established on Earth. Scientists from 40 different species collaborated there, sharing knowledge that was revolutionizing medicine across the galaxy. The breakthroughs they'd made had saved millions of lives. One day, a young human doctor approached her. "Dr. Hyun, I wanted to thank you. My grandmother was one of the protesters who demanded we turn away the refugees. She thought they'd destroy our world. But last month, a moth healer saved her life using techniques we'd never have discovered without them. She asked me to tell you she was wrong, and she's sorry." Hyun smiled. tell her we were all wrong about many things. But we learned, that's what matters. Engineer Somin had become famous across the galaxy as the creator of the Unity network. She received offers from a dozen governments to work exclusively for them, but she turned them all down. Instead, she continued improving the network, making sure it remained free and accessible to everyone. Knowledge should be free, she said in an interview. Communication should be open. The moment we start controlling who can speak and who can listen, we become what we fought against. President Minji, now retired, spent her days teaching at the university. She taught courses on ethics, diplomacy, and the importance of principles over profit. Her students came from across the galaxy, young beings who wanted to build a better future. One student asked her, "Was it worth it? The war, the deaths, the years of struggle?" Minji looked out the window at the diverse crowd of beings walking through the campus. Every life lost was a tragedy. Every moment of suffering hurt. But yes, it was worth it. Because we proved that kindness isn't weakness, that standing up for what's right matters more than playing it safe. We showed the galaxy that there's power in compassion. She paused, then added, "The coalition wanted us to believe that survival required cruelty, that helping others would destroy us. They were wrong. Helping others saved us. It made us stronger, smarter, better. The refugees didn't take from Earth. They gave us gifts we never could have developed alone." Captain Jiwon commanded a much larger vessel now, the EDF Persistence II, named after her original blockade-running ship. But she still made runs to remote systems, carrying supplies to those in need. Old habits died hard. Her crew was mixed now, humans and aliens working side by side. Her first officer was a Krell, her chief engineer was a Stonewalker, and her navigator was a Moth. They were family, bound together by shared purpose. On the coalition homeworlds, the changes continued. It wasn't easy. The Draxith Empire fought against every reform, trying to maintain their power. But slowly the system was becoming more just. Minor species had voices now. The Unity network meant that corruption and exploitation were harder to hide. There were setbacks. There were battles. But the direction was clear. One day a transmission arrived at Earth from a distant corner of space. A new species, fleeing persecution from a regional power outside coalition space. They had heard stories about Earth, about the world that took in the unwanted. Is it true? Their message asked. Is there really a place for those who have nowhere else to go? Ambassador Jiho, Minji's successor as Earth's chief diplomat, prepared his response. Around him, the command center buzzed with activity. Humans and aliens worked together, planning how to help these newest refugees. He thought about how far they'd come. From a small planet afraid of offending the galactic powers, to the heart of a movement that was changing the galaxy itself. From a species that stood alone, to one surrounded by friends who had once been strangers. Jiho recorded his message, and his words would echo across space to reach beings who desperately needed hope. Yes, it's true. Earth takes in those who need sanctuary. We don't care what the powerful say you've done wrong. We don't care if you're inconvenient or difficult or different. If you need help, we're here. The Haven Accord is here. You're not alone anymore. He paused, then added the words that had become Earth's unofficial motto, spoken first by President Minji so many years ago. Welcome home. As the message transmitted across the stars, Jiho looked at the Earth below, the blue and green world that had refused to turn away the suffering, even when it meant standing against the entire galaxy. The world that had learned from its own painful history and chosen to be better. They had been tested. They had suffered. They had lost people they loved, but they had proven something important. That the strength of a civilization isn't measured by its weapons or its wealth. It's measured by how it treats those who have nothing, by whether it chooses kindness when cruelty would be easier, by whether it stands up for what's right, even when the cost is high. The galaxy had banished the refugees, had cast them into darkness and despair.